The shovel struck something that wasn't earth. Detective Sarah Chen froze, her breath forming small clouds in the October air as she peered down into the shallow pit behind the abandoned farmhouse. The metallic clang had been too sharp, too deliberate to be a rock. She brushed away the loose soil with her gloved hands, revealing the corner of what looked like a wooden crate, its surface darkened by decades of moisture and decay. "Martinez, get over here," she called to her partner, who was photographing tire tracks near the collapsed barn. The case had started 3 days ago with a missing person report. 16-year-old Emma Vaughn vanished from her bedroom window without a trace. No signs of struggle, no ransom demand, just an empty bed and curtains that danced in the October wind. The only lead had been a witness who claimed to see a figure carrying something toward this property on the night Emma disappeared. Detective Martinez approached, his camera still hanging around his neck. "What've you got?" His voice carried the weary tone of someone who'd worked too many cases involving missing children, cases that rarely ended well. Chen continued scraping away the dirt, her movements becoming more urgent as the outline of the wooden container became clearer. "Help me dig this out, it's bigger than I thought." The crate extended in both directions, and as they worked together to uncover it, the dimensions became apparent, roughly 6 feet long, 3 feet wide. The size sent a chill through both detectives that had nothing to do with the autumn temperature. The farmhouse loomed behind them, its windows like dead eyes, staring down at their excavation. The property had been abandoned for 15 years, ever since old Henrik Nordstrom had died and left no heirs willing to maintain the remote acreage. Local teenagers had used it as a hangout, until strange sounds and unexplained lights had driven them away. Now even the bravest kids avoided the place after dark. Martinez grabbed a pry bar from their equipment bag and wedged it under the lid of the crate. "On 3, he said, positioning himself for leverage. The wood groaned in protest, then split with a sharp crack that echoed across the empty fields. The lid came free, revealing not Emma Vaughn, but something far more disturbing. Inside lay the skeletal remains of what had once been a young person, the bones yellowed with age and nestled in scraps of fabric that might have been a dress. A tarnished locket rested against the rib cage, and strands of auburn hair still clung to the skull. This wasn't their missing girl. These remains were far too old, predating Emma's disappearance by decades. "Jesus," Martinez whispered, stepping back from the grave. "How long has this been here?" Chen pulled out her phone to call the coroner, but the device showed no signal. The farmhouse seemed to swallow radio waves and cell towers alike, creating a dead zone that extended for miles in every direction. She'd have to drive back to town to make the call, leaving Martinez to secure the scene. As she stood to head for the car, a sound drifted from the farmhouse, the unmistakable creak of a door opening. Both detectives turned toward the building. The front door, which had been firmly closed when they'd arrived, now hung ajar. Beyond the threshold lay only darkness, but something about that darkness felt alive, watching. Martinez drew his weapon, muscle memory overriding rational thought. "Could be the wind," Chen said, but her own hand had moved instinctively to her holster. The October afternoon had been still, without even a breeze to rustle the dry leaves that carpeted the ground around the farmhouse. A second sound emerged from within the structure, the soft padding of bare feet on wooden floors, as if someone were walking carefully through the rooms above. The footsteps paused directly over where they stood, and dust motes drifted down from the rotted eaves. Martinez kept his weapon trained on the doorway, while Chen moved closer to the house, her curiosity overriding caution. The front steps sagged under her weight as she approached the entrance. The door had swung wider now, revealing a glimpse of the interior, peeling wallpaper, a staircase with missing balusters, and shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence felt expectant, as if something inside were holding its breath. "Police," Chen called out, her voice swallowed by the empty rooms. "If someone's in there, come out with your hands visible." The response came not as words, but as a child's laughter, light, musical, and utterly wrong in the context of their grim discovery. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing through the house, and spilling out into the yard, where Martinez stood guard over their excavation site. Chen stepped across the threshold, her flashlight cutting through the gloom of the front room. The beam revealed furniture covered in dusty sheets, a fireplace filled with the debris of bird nests, and walls stained with water damage that created patterns resembling faces in the dim light. The laughter had stopped, but the air itself seemed to vibrate with an unnatural tension. The staircase curved upward into deeper darkness, and Chen could see that several of the steps had rotted through completely. No one could have walked up those stairs recently. The structure wouldn't support even a child's weight, yet the sounds had definitely come from above, and they'd been too deliberate, too rhythmic to be settling timbers or scurrying rodents. Martinez's voice called from outside, tight with urgency. "Chen, you need to see this." She backed out of the house, keeping her flashlight trained on the staircase until she cleared the doorway. Martinez was kneeling beside their excavation, his face pale in the afternoon light. He'd uncovered more of the area around the wooden crate, and the disturbed earth revealed the corners of additional containers. "There are more," he said simply. "At least 3 more boxes, maybe more than that." The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. This wasn't a single tragic incident, it was a burial ground, a place where multiple victims had been interred over what might have been years or decades. The skeletal remains they'd uncovered were just the beginning, and somewhere in this cursed earth might lie the answer to Emma Vaughn's disappearance. As they worked to uncover the additional graves, the shadows began to lengthen. The October sun was setting earlier each day, and the farmhouse cast an increasingly dark silhouette across their work site. Martinez had brought portable lights from the car, but the illumination seemed to create more shadows than it dispelled, and both detectives found themselves glancing nervously at the house between shovel loads of dirt. The second crate was smaller than the first, clearly meant for a younger victim. When they pried it open, the remains inside were so small and fragile that Chen had to look away. Martinez photographed the scene with grim professionalism, but his hands shook slightly as he adjusted the camera settings. The third box contained not bones but something far more disturbing. It was empty, but the interior showed signs of recent use. Fresh scratches marred the wooden walls, as if someone had clawed desperately at the confines. Strands of dark hair were caught on the rough splinters, and the hair looked too fresh, too recently pulled to have been there long. "Emma," Chen breathed, holding up one of the strands to catch the fading light. The color matched perfectly with the description they'd been given of the missing girl. Dark brown, almost black, with a slight wave that caught the light. Martinez stood abruptly, scanning the area around them with renewed intensity. If she was here, where is she now? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither wanted to voice. Had they arrived too late? Had Emma Vaughn already joined the other victims in their underground chambers? The child's laughter came again, but this time it originated not from the house but from somewhere beneath their feet. Both detectives froze, listening intently as the sound seemed to move through the earth itself, traveling from grave to grave like an echo in a cavern. Chen knelt and pressed her ear to the ground, but the laughter had already faded, leaving only the natural sounds of approaching evening, the rustle of dry grass and the distant call of crows settling into their roost. "There's something else down here," Martinez said, his voice barely above a whisper. He was examining the area between the graves, where the earth showed signs of disturbance, despite the lack of additional burial sites. As he brushed away the surface soil, a different shape began to emerge, not another coffin, but what looked like the outline of a door or trapdoor, its edges barely visible in the dying light. Chen joined him in clearing away the dirt, and together they uncovered a wooden hatch, set flush with the ground. Heavy iron hinges held it in place, and a modern padlock secured the latch, the first truly recent addition they'd found on the property. The lock was new enough that it still bore traces of the manufacturer's oil, suggesting it had been installed within the last few months. Martinez produced a pair of bolt cutters from their equipment, But as he positioned them around the lock's shackle, the laughter resumed, no longer the innocent sound of a child at play, but something distorted and wrong, as if it were being filtered through water or earth. The sound was definitely coming from below now, rising through the wooden hatch, with an intensity that made both detectives step back. "Emma," Chen called out, her voice carrying both hope and fear. "Emma, if you can hear me, we're police officers. We're here to help you." The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a voice so faint it might have been imagination. "Help me," it whispered, the words barely audible but unmistakably human. "Please help." Martinez cut through the padlock with a single decisive snap, and the shackle fell away onto the disturbed earth. Chen grasped the iron ring that served as a handle, and pulled upward. The hatch resisted at first, as if something below were holding it closed, then swung open with a groan that seemed to come from the earth itself. The opening revealed a set of stone steps descending into absolute darkness. The air that rose from below was cold and stale, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something organic and wrong, that made both detectives cover their noses with their sleeves. Chen played her flashlight beam down the steps, but the light seemed to be absorbed by the darkness before it could reveal the bottom of the passage. "This has to be the original root cellar," Martinez said, studying the stonework around the opening. "Probably dates back to when the house was built, but someone's been using it recently." Fresh footprints were visible in the dust on the upper steps, adult prints going both up and down, and smaller prints that might have belonged to a child or teenager. The voice came again from the depths, clearer now but laden with exhaustion and fear. "I'm down here, I can't get out." The doors locked from the outside. Chen looked at Martinez, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his expression. They should wait for backup for the crime scene team, for the proper equipment to safely explore what lay beneath the farmhouse. But if Emma Vaughn was trapped in that cellar, every minute could be crucial. The temperature was dropping rapidly with the setting sun, and hypothermia could kill even a healthy teenager within hours in those conditions. "We're coming down," Chen called into the darkness. "Stay where you are and keep talking so we can find you." Martinez grabbed additional flashlights and rope from their equipment bag. "I don't like this," he muttered, but he was already preparing to descend. "Something about this whole setup feels wrong. Why would someone dig graves right above their hiding place? It's like they wanted them to be found." Chen had been thinking the same thing, but the possibility that Emma was trapped below overrode her caution. She took the lead, testing each stone step carefully before committing her full weight. The walls of the passage were lined with fitted stones, clearly the work of skilled masons, but moisture had made them slick and treacherous. The beam of her flashlight revealed that the stairs continued down much farther than a typical root cellar would require, descending at least 20 feet into the earth. The voice called out again, closer now but oddly muffled. "I'm in the back room. There are other rooms down here, but I can't get to them. The doors are locked." The passage opened into a chamber that was far larger and more elaborate than Chen had expected. Her flashlight revealed a network of connected rooms carved directly into the bedrock beneath the farmhouse. The walls were lined with shelves that had once held preserved food and supplies, but many of the shelves now contained other items, photographs, personal effects, and what looked like journals or diaries, bound in leather. Martinez joined her at the bottom of the stairs, his own light adding to the illumination. "This place is huge," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "It's like a whole underground house." They followed the sound of the voice deeper into the complex, passing through doorways that had been fitted with modern locks, heavy deadbolts that could only be opened from one side. The air grew colder as they descended, and their breath began to form visible hollows in the beam of their flashlights. The voice was coming from behind a heavy wooden door at the end of the main corridor. Unlike the other barriers they'd encountered, this one showed signs of desperate attempts to break through from the inside, scratch marks gouged into the wood, and stains that looked disturbingly like blood around the edges. "Emma?" Chen called through the door. "We're right here. We're going to get you out." "Thank God," came the reply, and now Chen could hear the tears in the voice. "I've been down here for days. I don't know how many days. The man who brought me here, he said he'd be back, but that was so long ago. Martinez examined the lock while Chen continued talking to the girl, trying to keep her calm while they worked. The mechanism was complex, requiring a key that they obviously didn't have, but the doorframe was old wood that might yield to force. Stand back from the door, Martinez instructed, bracing himself against the opposite wall. I'm going to kick it in. The first attempt produced only a solid thud and a jarring impact that traveled up Martinez's leg. The second kick splintered the wood around the lock, but the door held. On the third try, the frame gave way with a crash that echoed through the underground chambers. Chen pushed through the opening, her flashlight sweeping the small room beyond. What she saw made her stop dead in her tracks, her mind struggling to process the scene before her. The room was empty. There was no girl, no Emma Vaughn, no evidence that anyone had been imprisoned there. The floor was covered with undisturbed dust, and spider webs stretched across the corners in patterns that would have been impossible if someone had been moving around the space recently. But the voice had definitely come from this room. They'd heard it clearly through the door just moments before. Emma, Chen called out, her voice now carrying a note of confusion and growing unease. Where are you? The response came from behind them, back in the main corridor. I'm here. Why did you leave me? Please don't leave me here alone. Martinez spun around, his flashlight cutting through the darkness of the passage they'd just traversed. The beam revealed nothing but empty stone walls and the doorways they'd already investigated. The voice is moving, he said, his professional composure beginning to crack. That's not possible unless... He didn't finish the thought, but Chen understood. Unless there were passages they hadn't found, or unless whatever they were hearing wasn't entirely human. The possibility that they were dealing with something supernatural had been growing in her mind since they'd first heard the laughter, but her rational, detective-trained brain had rejected the idea. Now faced with the evidence of her own senses, she was forced to reconsider. They moved back through the complex, following the voice, as it seemed to lead them deeper into the underground maze. New passages revealed themselves as they searched, branching off from the main corridors in directions that should have been impossible given the layout of the farmhouse above. Some led to additional storage rooms filled with the detritus of decades, moldering furniture, rusted tools, and stacks of newspapers that chronicled local events going back to the... In one of the side chambers, Chen's flashlight illuminated a collection of photographs pinned to the stone walls. The images showed young girls, all of them appearing to be between the ages of 12 and 16, all of them bearing a disturbing similarity to Emma Vaughn. Dark hair, pale skin, and eyes that seemed to stare directly out of the photographs with expressions of fear and pleading. Martinez examined the pictures more closely, his light revealing details that made both detectives' blood run cold. The photographs weren't old, they were recent, printed on modern photo paper with the bright colors and sharp resolution of digital photography. But more disturbing still, some of the girls in the pictures were posed in the very chambers where Chen and Martinez now stood. These were taken down here, Martinez said, his voice tight with the effort of maintaining professional detachment. Someone's been bringing girls to this place for years, maybe decades. The voice called out again, now seeming to come from multiple directions at once. Please help me. I'm so scared. I want to go home. Chen studied the photographs more carefully, and her breath caught in her throat. In the corner of one image, barely visible in the background, was a detail that changed everything. A modern digital clock display showing not just the time, but the date. October 15th of the current year. 3 days ago, the night Emma Vaughn had disappeared. Martinez, she said, her voice barely steady. Look at this one. The photograph showed a girl who could have been Emma's twin, seated in what appeared to be the room they'd just broken into. But the girl in the picture looked directly at the camera, with an expression of such profound sadness and resignation that it was heartbreaking to observe. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, were other figures, the pale, indistinct shapes of what might have been other girls, their faces too obscured by darkness to make out clearly. As they stared at the photograph, the voice came again, but this time it was different. Instead of the single pleading voice they'd been following, there were multiple voices, a chorus of young girls, all speaking in unison, their words overlapping and echoing through the stone chambers. "We're all here," they said, and the sound seemed to come from the walls themselves. "We've always been here. We're waiting for someone to find us, to remember us, to tell our stories." The temperature in the chamber dropped suddenly, and both detectives could see their breath in thick clouds illuminated by their flashlights. The beam of Chen's light began to flicker, the batteries draining far faster than should have been possible. Martinez's flashlight was experiencing the same problem, the bright LED beginning to dim and pulse in an irregular rhythm. "We need to get out of here," Martinez said, backing toward what he thought was the entrance corridor. But as he turned, his light revealed that the passage they'd entered through was no longer there. Instead, the beam illuminated a solid stone wall, as if the doorway had never existed. Chen spun around, searching for the exit they'd used to enter the chamber. Her light revealed only more stone walls, broken by doorways that led to passages she didn't remember exploring. The underground complex had changed around them, rearranging itself in ways that defied physical possibility. The voices continued their chorus, but now individual words were becoming clear. Names, dozens of names spoken by girls who had never made it home. Sarah Patterson, disappeared. Michelle Torres, vanished 1994. Amanda Wright, missing since. The list went on, each name accompanied by a brief whisper of details, ages, dates, final memories of sunlight and family, before the darkness claimed them. And then, cutting through the chorus of the lost, came a voice Chen recognized from the missing person interviews. Emma Vaughn, not pleading for help, but adding her own name to the roll call of the disappeared. "Emma Vaughn," the voice said with heartbreaking clarity. "October 50, 16 years old. I just wanted to see my little brother grow up." Chen's flashlight failed completely, plunging her into absolute darkness. Martinez's light flickered once more and died, leaving them in blackness so complete it seemed to have physical weight. But even without light, they could sense movement around them, the soft whisper of bare feet on stone, the rustle of fabric, and the gentle sound of breathing that belonged to far more than just two people. "We're not alone down here," Martinez whispered, his voice barely audible. In the darkness, Chen felt something brush against her arm, a touch so light it might have been imagination, but warm with the presence of living flesh. Then another touch, and another, as invisible hands reached out to make contact, seeking comfort or offering it, bridging the gap between the living and whatever lay beyond. A new light appeared in the chamber, but not from any mechanical source. It was a pale, cold glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, revealing the truth that Chen and Martinez had stumbled into. The chamber wasn't empty. It was filled with the translucent figures of young girls, dozens of them, standing in patient formation, as if waiting for some long-delayed ceremony to begin. At the center of the group stood Emma Vaughn, no longer the missing person from the photographs, but something else entirely. Her form flickered between solid and transparent, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of all the others who had joined her in this underground realm. "We've been waiting," she said, her eyes fixed on the two detectives, with an expression that held no malice, only infinite sadness. "Waiting for someone to find us, to understand what happened here, to make sure we're not forgotten." Chen found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What happened to you? Who did this?" Emma's form solidified slightly, and Chen could see the details of her face more clearly. Still recognizably the girl from the missing person flyers, but changed by her experience in ways that went beyond the physical. "He brought us here one by one," she said, "the man who lived in the house. He would choose us carefully, girls who wouldn't be missed right away, girls whose families were too busy or too broken to mount proper searches." The other figures began to move, forming a circle around the two detectives. Chen could see their faces now, young girls spanning decades, their clothing and hairstyles marking different eras, but all of them bearing the same expression of patient waiting. Henrik Nordstrom, Martinez breathed, recognition dawning. The old man who owned this place, but he died 15 years ago. Emma nodded, her form becoming more solid as she spoke. He did die, but his work continued. He had a partner, someone who learned his methods and carried them forward. Someone who still has a key to this place. The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. Their investigation hadn't ended with discovering the burial ground. It had only revealed the scope of a horror that was still ongoing. Somewhere above them, in the world of the living, a predator continued to operate, using the same methods that had been perfected in this underground chamber over the course of decades. Who? Chen asked. Who is his partner? Before Emma could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere above them. Heavy boots on wooden floors, moving with purpose through the abandoned farmhouse. The pale light in the chamber began to fade, and the ghostly figures of the missing girls started to disappear, but not before Emma stepped closer to Chen. "Find the journals," she whispered, her voice already becoming distant and ethereal. Henrik kept records of everything: names, dates, methods, and the location of his partner's current hunting ground. "The journals will tell you everything you need to know." The light died completely, leaving Chen and Martinez alone in the darkness, but the footsteps above were getting closer, and now they could hear voices, multiple people moving through the house, their words muffled but urgent. Backup had arrived, drawn by the discovery of their abandoned patrol car and the evidence of excavation in the yard. Chen fumbled for her backup flashlight, finally locating it in her jacket pocket. The weak beam revealed that the chamber had returned to its normal configuration, with clear passages leading back toward the stone steps. The photographs were still pinned to the walls, and scattered among them were the leather-bound journals that Emma had mentioned. Detailed records of Henrik Nordstrom's decades-long reign of terror. Martinez was already gathering the journals, stuffing them into evidence bags with hands that shook only slightly. "We need to get these to the lab," he said. "If there really is a partner still operating." Chen nodded, but her attention was fixed on one particular photograph that she hadn't noticed before. It showed not a victim, but a man middle-aged, wearing the uniform of the county sheriff's department. The photograph was recent, and the face was one she recognized from daily briefings and department meetings. Sheriff Dennis Kowalski, the man who had assigned them to investigate Emma Vaughn's disappearance, the man who had suggested they search the abandoned Nordstrom property, the man who had access to missing person reports and the resources to make people disappear without trace. The footsteps above had stopped, but now Chen could hear voices calling their names. Kowalski's voice, specifically, shouting instructions to other officers about securing the scene and ensuring that no evidence was contaminated. The irony of it made Chen's blood run cold. The very man who was orchestrating the cover-up was now positioning himself to control their investigation. Chen grabbed Martinez's arm, pointing to the photograph. His face went pale as he recognized the implications, but before either of them could speak, they heard the sound of someone beginning to descend the stone steps. Heavy boots on ancient stone, moving with the confidence of someone who knew the layout of the underground complex intimately. "Chen." "Martinez," Kowalski's voice echoed through the passages. "What you found down there?" Chen looked at Martinez, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his expression. They were trapped in an underground maze, with a man who had spent years perfecting the art of making people disappear, a man who had access to all the resources of law enforcement to cover his track. The journals they'd discovered were evidence of his guilt, but they were also potentially the only proof that would ever exist of his crimes. Martinez made a quick decision, shoving the evidence bags containing the journals into a crevice between two stones, and covering them with loose debris. If they didn't survive the next few minutes, at least someone might eventually find the truth. The beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness of the main corridor, and Sheriff Kowalski appeared at the bottom of the stone step. He was alone, having left the other officers to secure the scene above ground. His expression was one of concern and professionalism, but Chen could see something else in his eyes now that she knew what to look for, the cold calculation of a predator, assessing potential threat. "Thank God you're both safe," he said, his voice carrying exactly the right note of relief and authority. "When we found your car and saw the excavation site, we thought the worst. What did you find down here?" Chen forced herself to respond normally, though every instinct was screaming at her to run. "Old root cellar, probably dating back to the original construction. We found some evidence that someone's been using it recently." Kowalski's flashlight swept the chamber, lingering on the photographs pinned to the walls. If he was surprised to see his own image among them, he showed no reaction. "Disturbing stuff," he said calmly. "Looks like old Henrik was even more twisted than we thought. Good thing he's been dead for 15 years. The casual dismissal was perfectly calculated, acknowledging the evidence while deflecting suspicion away from any ongoing threat. But Chen caught the subtle tell in his posture, the way his hand rested casually near his service weapon, while he positioned himself between them and the only exit. "We should get these photographs to the lab," Martinez said, trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy. "There might be forensic evidence that could help identify the victims." Kowalski nodded approvingly. "Absolutely, but first, I need you both to tell me exactly what you found down here, every detail. We want to make sure we don't miss anything in our official report." The request sounded reasonable, but Chen understood its true purpose. Kowalski needed to know how much they'd discovered, how much evidence existed, and most importantly, how much they'd figured out about his own involvement. Depending on their answers, he would decide whether they could be allowed to leave the underground complex alive. Chen began to recount their discovery of the burial site, watching Kowalski's face carefully for any reaction. She mentioned the empty coffin with the fresh scratches, the hair that matched Emma Vaughn's description, and their descent into the cellar, following what they'd believed to be the missing girl's voice. Throughout her account, the sheriff maintained his expression of professional interest, but she could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. When she finished, Kowalski was quiet for a long moment, his flashlight playing over the photographs and journals scattered around the chamber. Finally, he spoke, and his voice had changed subtly, the protective veneer of authority replaced by something colder and more calculating. "You know," he said, conversationally, Henrik Nordstrom was a brilliant man in his own twisted way. He understood that the key to getting away with this kind of thing isn't just choosing the right victims, it's controlling the investigation, making sure the right people are assigned to the case, steering them toward the conclusions you want them to reach, and knowing when to cut your losses. Chen felt Martinez tense beside her, both of them recognizing the shift in Kowalski's tone. The pretense was dropping away, revealing the predator that had been hiding beneath the badge for years. Henrik's only mistake, Kowalski continued, was working alone. He didn't have anyone to cover for him when things went wrong, no one to misdirect investigations or make evidence disappear. "I've been much more careful about that." The admission hung in the air between them, confirmation of what Chen had already suspected, but hoped might somehow be wrong. Kowalski had been Henrik's partner, learning from the older man's techniques, while using his position in law enforcement to perfect the art of making people disappear without trace. Martinez made a subtle move toward his weapon, but Kowalski was fast. The sheriff's gun appeared in his hand with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd drawn it many times before, the muzzle trained on Martinez's chest, from a distance that would make missing impossible. "I really hoped it wouldn't come to this," Kowalski said, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine regret. "You're both good detectives, and under different circumstances, I would have been happy to work with you for years, but you've seen too much, figured out too much. The journals alone would be enough to end everything I've built." Chen's mind raced, searching for options in a situation that seemed hopeless. They were 20 feet underground in a stone chamber, with only one exit, facing an armed man who had spent years planning for exactly this kind of scenario. Even if they could somehow overpower him, there were other officers above ground who would hear any struggle. But then she remembered Emma's words about the journals containing information about Kowalski's current hunting ground. If he was still actively taking victims, there might be someone else in immediate danger, someone they could still save if they found a way to survive the next few minutes. "Where is she?" Chen asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Where's Emma?" Kowalski's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that Chen was still thinking about the missing girl rather than their immediate situation. "Emma Vaughn is exactly where she needs to be," he said, "safe and secure, waiting for me to decide what to do with her." The words confirmed Chen's worst fears. Emma was still alive, but trapped somewhere under Kowalski's control. The voices they'd heard in the chamber had been real, but not supernatural. Somehow Emma had found a way to project her voice through the underground passages, leading them to the evidence that would expose her captor. Martinez spoke up, his voice carefully controlled. "If you kill us, there'll be questions. Too many people know we were investigating this case." Kowalski shrugged, as if the concern were academic. Two dedicated detectives, working a difficult case involving a serial killer from the past, venture too deep into a dangerous underground complex, and suffer an unfortunate accident. It happens more often than you'd think. Old buildings are notoriously unsafe, especially when people start digging around foundations and disturbing structural support. As if summoned by his words, a rumbling sound began to echo through the stone chambers, the groaning of old timbers, and shifting earth, that suggested the stability of the underground complex was already compromised. Chen realized that Kowalski had been planning for this contingency, perhaps for years, preparing a way to eliminate threats, while making their deaths appear accidental. The rumbling grew louder, and dust began to fall from the stone ceiling above them. Kowalski backed toward the entrance passage, keeping his weapon trained on the two detectives, while positioning himself to escape before the chamber collapsed completely. "I'm truly sorry it has to end this way," he said, and Chen believed he was sincere. "But I've worked too hard and too long to let it all fall apart now. Henrik taught me that sometimes you have to make difficult choices to protect what you've built." The ceiling cracked with a sound like gunfire, and a shower of debris fell between Kowalski and his target. Chen saw their opportunity and dove sideways, pulling Martinez with her toward the darkest corner of the chamber, where the photographs and journals were displayed. The sheriff's shot went wide, the bullet ricocheting off stone walls with a whine that was almost immediately drowned out by the sound of the ceiling beginning to give way. Kowalski cursed and fired again, but the falling debris was making it impossible to maintain clear sightline. Chen and Martinez pressed themselves against the back wall of the chamber, searching desperately for any alcove or passage that might offer protection from the collapse. Chen's hand found the crevice where Martinez had hidden the evidence bags, and her fingers closed around something else, a metal ring set into the stone, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. She pulled on it and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage that led deeper into the bedrock. "Here," she whispered to Martinez, pushing him toward the hidden entrance. Behind them, Kowalski was shouting something, but his words were lost in the cacophony of the collapsing chamber. Chunks of stone and timber were crashing down where they'd been standing just moments before. They squeezed through the narrow opening just as the main chamber gave way completely. The sound was indescribable, thousands of tons of earth and stone, settling into the space where Henrik Nordstrom had conducted his decades of horror. When the rumbling finally stopped, the passage behind them was completely blocked, sealing them off from both Kowalski and any hope of rescue. Martinez played his flashlight beam along the narrow corridor they'd entered, revealing rough-hewn walls that looked much older than the rest of the complex. "Where does this lead?" he asked. Chen had no answer, but she could feel a slight movement of air against her face, suggesting that the passage connected to another exit. They began to move forward, stepping carefully over loose stones and debris that had fallen during the collapse. The corridor angled upward, winding through the bedrock in a pattern that seemed to follow natural fissures in the stone. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they began to see traces of natural light filtering down from above. The passage ended at the bottom of what appeared to be a natural well or sinkhole, with iron rungs set into the walls, leading up toward the surface. Chen climbed first, testing each rung carefully before committing her weight. The metal was old and rust-flaked, but it held. As she neared the top, she could see that the opening was concealed by a heavy wooden cover, but light was seeping around the edges. She pushed upward, and the cover shifted enough to let in a shaft of afternoon sunlight. They were somewhere in the woods behind the farmhouse, far enough from the main excavation site that the sounds of the collapse might not have been heard by the other officers. Chen climbed out and helped Martinez up after her. They found themselves in a small clearing, surrounded by dense forest, with no immediate sign of the law enforcement activity they'd left behind at the farmhouse. The wooden cover they'd emerged through was camouflaged with fallen leaves, and looked like nothing more than a natural depression in the forest floor. Martinez pulled out his cell phone, relieved to find that they had signal again. "Who do we call?" he asked. "If Kowalski is involved, we can't trust anyone in the department." Chen thought about the journals they'd discovered, the evidence that was now buried under tons of collapsed stone, along with Sheriff Kowalski himself. Without that physical evidence, proving their story would be nearly impossible. But they still had one advantage. Somewhere, Emma Vaughn was still alive, and finding her would provide the proof they needed. "State police," she said, "and FBI. This crosses jurisdictions, and we need someone with the authority to investigate the entire department if necessary." As Martinez made the calls, Chen studied the surrounding forest, trying to get her bearings. The farmhouse was somewhere to the east, but she could also see what looked like another structure through the trees, a newer building that didn't appear on any of the property maps they'd studied. "Martinez," she said, pointing toward the distant structure. "What's that?" He followed her gaze and lowered his phone. The calls had gone through, and backup was on the way, but it would be at least 30 minutes before anyone arrived. In the meantime, they had a choice to make: wait for help, or investigate the possibility that Emma Vaughn was being held somewhere nearby. The building was a modern prefabricated structure, the kind used for storage or temporary housing on construction sites. It looked completely out of place in the rural setting, hidden from the main road by the forest, and invisible from the farmhouse. As they approached, Chen could see that it was connected to a portable generator and had been fitted with multiple locks and security measures that were far more elaborate than any legitimate storage facility would require. Martinez drew his weapon and motioned for Chen to approach from the other side. The windows of the building were covered with blackout material, making it impossible to see inside, but they could hear sounds from within, movement, and what might have been a voice. Chen pressed her ear to the wall near one of the windows, and heard what she'd been hoping to hear: Emma Vaughn's voice, weak but unmistakably alive, talking to someone. The words were muffled by the walls, but the tone was one of fear mixed with defiance, suggesting that the girl was still fighting, still hoping for rescue. Martinez had located what appeared to be the main entrance, a heavy steel door, with multiple deadbolts and a sophisticated electronic lock. The door was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry without ensuring it was properly secure. Chen caught Martinez's eye and nodded toward the door. They had no idea what they might find inside, or whether Kowalski had had time to escape the collapsing chamber and reach this location ahead of them. But with state police and FBI agents on the way, this might be their only chance to rescue Emma before she was moved to another location. Martinez eased the door open, revealing a short corridor that led deeper into the structure. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the air inside was stale and recycled, suggesting the building had been sealed for ventilation. They could hear voices more clearly now, Emma's voice, and a man's voice that definitely wasn't Kowalski. They moved down the corridor, passing several doors that appeared to lead to storage areas, or equipment rooms. The voices were coming from the end of the hallway, behind a door marked with a simple number. Chen positioned herself on one side of the door, while Martinez took the other. Through the thin walls, they could hear the conversation inside clearly now. Emma was asking about someone named Mr. Case, presumably Kowalski, and when he would be returning. The man's voice was apologetic, but firm, explaining that there had been complications at the farmhouse and that plans would have to change. Martinez tried the door handle and found it unlocked. He looked at Chen, who nodded, and then pushed the door open in a single swift motion. The room beyond was set up like a makeshift apartment, with a bed, a small table, and basic amenities. Emma Vaughn sat on the bed, still wearing the clothes she'd disappeared in 5 days earlier, her face pale, but alert. Standing near the window was a man Chen recognized from the sheriff's department, Deputy Frank Morrison, a quiet, reliable officer who'd been with the department for over a decade. Morrison's hand moved toward his weapon, but Martinez was faster. "Don't," Martinez said, his gun trained on the deputy's chest. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Emma looked up at Chen with an expression of desperate hope. "Are you real police?" she asked. "Are you here to take me home?" Chen holstered her weapon and moved to the girl's side. "We're Detective Chen and Detective Martinez," she said. "We've been looking for you for 5 days. Are you hurt?" Emma shook her head, but Chen could see the psychological damage in her eyes, the kind of trauma that came from days of captivity, never knowing if each moment might be her last. "They kept saying someone was coming to get me," she said, "but then there was this loud noise, like an explosion, and Frank came running back here, saying everything had gone wrong." Morrison hadn't moved, his hands raised but his expression one of resignation rather than fear. "It's over, isn't it?" he said quietly. "Dennis is dead, the farmhouse collapsed, and you know everything." Chen studied his face, seeing not the cold calculation she'd observed in Kowalski, but something more complex, guilt, relief and exhaustion, all mixed together. "How long," she asked, "how long have you been involved in this?" Morrison's shoulders sagged as if a great weight had been lifted from them. 15 years, he said, "ever since Henrik died and Dennis found his journals. I never wanted any part of it, but he had evidence that I'd been skimming from the evidence locker. Small stuff, nothing that hurt anyone, but enough to end my career and put me in prison." The confession spilled out of him, as if he'd been waiting years for the chance to tell someone the truth. Kowalski had used Morrison's minor corruption as leverage to force his participation in something far worse, helping to identify potential victims, misdirecting investigation, and providing security for the locations where the girls were held before being moved to their final resting place beneath the farmhouse. "I never hurt anyone," Morrison said, his voice breaking. "I swear I never hurt anyone. I couldn't find a way out. Every time I thought about coming forward, Dennis would remind me that I was already complicit, that no one would believe I hadn't been involved from the beginning." Chen felt a mix of disgust and pity for the man. His cowardice had enabled years of horror, but she could also see the genuine remorse in his expression. Unlike Kowalski, Morrison hadn't chosen this path. He'd been trapped by his own small sins, and manipulated into participating in something monstrous. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance announced the arrival of the state police and FBI agents Martinez had called for. Chen stayed with Emma while Martinez secured Morrison, who offered no resistance. The deputy seemed almost relieved to finally be under arrest, as if the weight of his secrets had been crushing him for years. As they waited for the other officers to reach their location, Emma told them about her captivity. She'd been taken from her bedroom window by Kowalski himself, who'd used his knowledge of the family's routine to time the abduction perfectly. She'd been held first in the underground complex beneath the farmhouse, where she'd found ways to project her voice through the stone passages to try to attract attention from anyone who might be searching for her. When Chen and Martinez had arrived at the farmhouse, Kowalski had moved Emma to the secure facility in the woods, intending to keep her there until he could decide on a permanent solution to the problem she represented. Morrison had been assigned to guard her, but his heart hadn't been in the task. He'd been feeding her information about the investigation, perhaps hoping that somehow she might find a way to escape and expose the truth. The first helicopter landed in the clearing near the concealed entrance to the underground passage, and within minutes the forest was swarming with state police officers and federal agents. Chen gave her preliminary report to Agent Sarah Winters, a FBI specialist in crimes against children, who took charge of the scene with calm efficiency. Emma was taken to a hospital for evaluation, but not before she gave Chen a hug that conveyed more gratitude than words ever could. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." As the emergency responders worked to extract Kowalski's body from the collapsed chamber, Chen reflected on the case that had started with a simple missing person report and evolved into something far more complex. The journals they'd discovered would eventually be recovered from the debris, providing evidence of crimes spanning decades and involving victims whose names had been forgotten by everyone except the families who still mourned them. Morrison's cooperation would be crucial in identifying other potential victims and understanding the full scope of the conspiracy. His detailed knowledge of Kowalski's methods and the locations of evidence would help close cases that had been gathering dust in file cabinets for years. But perhaps most importantly, Emma Vaughn would go home to her family, traumatized but alive, carrying with her the voices of all the girls who hadn't been as fortunate. In the weeks that followed, as the investigation expanded and the true horror of what had been happening in their quiet rural community came to light, Emma would become an advocate for other victims, ensuring that their stories were told and their memories honored. The farmhouse would be demolished, and the burial ground would be consecrated as a memorial to the victims whose remains were found there. The underground complex would be filled with concrete, sealing away the chambers where so much suffering had occurred. But the evil that had festered in that place for decades was finally exposed to the light, where it could no longer hide behind badges and authority and the trust of a community that had never suspected the monster living among them. As Chen watched Emma's family reunion at the hospital later that evening, she thought about the girls' words in the underground chamber. The ghostly voices, speaking of being forgotten, of stories that needed to be told. Those stories would be told now, and the girls who had vanished into the darkness would finally be remembered not as victims, but as the brave souls who had somehow found a way to guide the living toward